Today we are going to be watching a video by Daily Dose of Wisdom featuring Frank Turek, a Christian apologist who is wrong all the time. Daily Dose of Wisdom, of course, is always wrong all the time also, and today they're going to be reading and responding to some comments. So let's see how that goes for him.
If it came from a creator, a mind writing code, where did that mind come from? This line of thinking asserts something could not come from nothing, which is logical, but did the creator come from nothing? The same logic must be applied again, but most are happy to stop at that point. So, what would be your response to this?
There has to be an uncreated first cause, an uncaused first cause. You can't go on.
Why does there have to be that? If your problem is that the universe is too complex to have arisen on its own via natural processes, you are inventing a more complex thing to explain it. So therefore, logically, something had to create that also. You end up with an infinite loop, an infinite recursion, if you will.
On an infinite regress of causes. Either the universe is the uncaused first cause, or something beyond the universe is the uncaused first cause. All the evidence that we know to this date, including evidence admitted by atheists, is that the universe had a beginning. That the universe
This iteration of the universe has a beginning, and what I mean by the universe is all of the matter and energy contained in what sprang forth from the Big Bang. What came before that, if there was a before that, is unknown. But suffice it to say, it could be nothing, a sort of multiverse situation. Nothing does not have to be created. Nothing is nothing. You could have an infinite number of universes springing forth from nothing, and that doesn't really violate anything in particular. In fact, it seems very reasonable.
can't be the uncaused first cause. That space, time, and matter literally came into existence out of non-being. In other words, there was no thing. And probably, Brandon, we need to clarify what no thing means, because Lawrence Krauss wrote a book about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago called The Universe from Nothing, where he tries to explain how the universe could come into existence out of nothing. But even Krauss admits, when you press him far enough, his nothing is not non-being, as in no thing. His nothing is a quantum vacuum or some pre-existing material.
And how do you know that's wrong? How do you know a universe couldn't spring from a quantum vacuum? How do you know the quantum vacuum didn't just always exist? How do you know the multiverse didn't just always exist? One of my friends has a very good answer to this question because I find it quite perplexing that anything exists at all. Whether you believe in God or not, it is still perplexing that anything exists, that we are here in this moment, and adding God to that equation doesn't make it any less baffling. But my friend had a pretty good answer here. She said she thinks that things exist because it's impossible for things to not exist. Is that a satisfying answer to humans who live in a universe of cause and effect? Well, no. But does the universe exist to satisfy us? Well, also no.
Of space. And so his nothing was not non-being. Nothing is what rocks dream about, as Aristotle said. If I said I had nothing for lunch today, you wouldn't think I had a plate of food called nothing. You would say, well, Frank didn't have lunch today. That's what we mean, non-being. Something or nothing existed, no thing. And when you look at the evidence, not only from science, but from philosophy,
And yet, most scientists are not believers in God or divinity or Christianity or any of this stuff. Most scientists who study these things, especially in the realm of physics and quantum physics, do not believe in God, which seems like a pretty big problem. It seems like they would have thought about, well, where did all this come from? And if they thought about it enough, I would assume they have pretty good answers to that question. But the answers they have aren't the answers you have. Quite curious indeed, isn't it, Frank Turek, who has no math degree or physics degree whatsoever?
that the universe had a beginning, that time had a beginning, you have to conclude that whatever created space, matter, and time, or space, time, and matter more accurately, can't be made of space, time, and matter. In other words,
Well, in other words, you're describing nothing. If it's not made of space, time, and matter, what is it? You're describing nothing. That is literally nothing.
the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because it goes.
How does that make it personal? If you're saying personal in terms of having a personality, then sure. But I feel like they use personal to mean personal in the sense that you can have a relationship with it. And I don't think that there is enough evidence to justify any of these conclusions, but I think personal is the most questionable one. How do we know that what we call God is actually a sentient sort of person? How do we know it's not some kind of primordial consciousness that just does things? I mean, the universe as it is a pretty messy place. It could be better explained by a God that has no idea what the fuck it's doing, right?
go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons could make choices. The cause would also have to be intelligent, to have a mind to make a choice. So I always ask people, whenever you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of?
I don't think of anything when I hear that. I think that just sounds like fantasy. I mean, it sounds like nothing with power. How do you have nothing and power at the same time? That is a very confusing thought, isn't it?
And most people, of course, would rightfully say God. Now, this doesn't mean it's the Christian God. I mean, this could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God.
Well, that is correct. It's good that he acknowledges this point at least, because things like the Kalam cosmological argument only get you so far. But of course, there are problems with that too. I mean, the Kalam cosmological argument requires some answers that we don't have. It's reliant on ifs. If this is true, if that is also true, and this is true, then this must be true. Now, we can argue about whether the conclusion flows from the ifs, but the problem is, they're still ifs. If you're going to have that many ifs, you may as well just say outright, well, I believe there's a God, because there's not much difference. You're still believing in your answers to the ifs. And of course, I remain unconvinced of all of it.
But it is a being that is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent.
How do you know that? Where do you get this from? How do you know that exactly? I would like to know.
Now, take that second attribute, timeless. If this being is outside of time, that means it didn't have a beginning. If it didn't have a beginning, it didn't have a cause. So
Doesn't the Bible say that God has existed forever and will go on forever? If so, that sort of implies we have the same sort of problem as with an infinite universe. Namely, how are we here?
the being that created the universe, as far as we know, appears to be the uncaused first cause, the uncreated, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator. So
You can tie yourself in knot after knot trying to explain this in a way that makes sense. But it will not make sense. It is a nonsensical argument you are making here, based entirely in fantasy and fantastical propositions, fantastic leaps of logic that don't flow from what you are saying.
the evidence just points to that being existed. That being didn't have a beginning, which means that being didn't have a cause. That being is the uncaused first cause. And biblically, that being would be the great I am.
So, if you say that there is an uncaused first cause, how do you leap from that to it has to be the one from the Bible? I like to say this, I've said it frequently. You have a book, and that's great, but everybody has a book. The Jews have multiple books, the Muslims have multiple books, the Hindus have multiple books, Buddhists have books. Everybody's got a book. How do we know it's your book and not their book? What evidence do you have for me to believe? I mean, let's assume that there is a God of some kind. Let's just make that assumption right out the gate. What evidence do you have that that God is your God?
The being that had no beginning, the being that had no end, the being that just bees. And by the way,
The being that just bees. Now, I like the sound of that. A bee God I can get behind.
Jesus himself claimed to be that being because when he's pressed by the Pharisees, he says, before Abraham was born, I am. And what's the I am quotation from? It's a quotation from Exodus 3:14, the burning bush. Do you remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? And Moses says to God, who should I tell the Israelites you are? And God says to Moses, tell them I am sends you.
I need to watch that. I need to watch the Ten Commandments. I saw Ben-Hur recently, and man, what a fantastic film Ben-Hur is. But I loved especially the homoerotic undertones put in there, no doubt by Gore Vidal, who is a terribly underrated writer in general these days because he's been dead for a while and somehow ended up with not that much of a legacy. But I must say, fantastic movie. I guess I do need to see the Ten Commandments. You know, young Charlton Heston could get it, but like he did evolve into a weird right winger later on, so that's kind of shitty.
The being that had no beginning, the being that will have no end, the being that is the ground of all being. So, yes, the person has the right intuition that you can't go on an infinite regress of causes, but the person stating that doesn't realize there has to be an uncaused first cause.
If you have evidence, you don't need faith. Faith is what you have when you have no evidence. We don't go to church and sing songs about evolution, but one could easily imagine what that would be like. From primordial soup through sentient minds, evolution's journey intertwined. Survival of the fittest, and now we know through DNA we grow.
So I think a lot of people, though, do still believe that the universe, or maybe a previous universe or a multiverse or something else, has a eternal nature to it. And I think that what you're saying is that, at least as it relates to this observable universe that we can look at with scientific instruments, you're saying that the science is pointing to that this universe is not eternal. Is that right?
This universe is not eternal, and according to Alexander Vilenkin, who's an agnostic astronomer, with their gourd, I always get their names wrong. The Vilenkin Gourd Booth theorem from 2006. In fact, I have the book on my shelf. It's Many Worlds in One, written by Alexander Vilenkin, who's a believer in the multiverse, by the way. This guy's an agnostic, but he's saying, look, even if there are other universes out there, there has to be an absolute beginning. Now, he doesn't think.
So why would he be agnostic then? Shouldn't he agree with you? I mean, I always tend to think when they quote scientists and agnostics and such, they're misquoting them or taking them the wrong way. And, even if there is an absolute beginning, obviously this guy doesn't seem to think it's much of a problem because he's agnostic to the question of God. He wouldn't be if he thought it was really that much of a problem that a universe had to spring forth from nothing. And again, when it comes down to it, we really don't know. We really can't say if necessarily there had to be a beginning. We just can't say.
Think it's God, but my question is, what else could it be? So you don't get rid of the need for a creator by multiplying creations. you multiplying the need for a creator by multiplying creations. Who's
I would say by adding one creator to the mix, you just add a need for more creators. See, we can play the same game, buddy. We can do the same thing you do about your God. You can say, well, nuh-uh, you can't do that because he's like the uncreated creator. Well, you haven't really shown that there has to be an uncreated creator. He could be a created creator. What's stopping him from being that? And then you end up with the same problem over and over again. So, I'm just saying, we can do the same thing you're doing right now.
Creating these universes? Why are they out there? These universes can't be eternal because in a time-space continuum like ours, you would never get to today if there were an infinite number of moments before today. If there were an infinite number of days before today, you'd never get to today because you'd always have to live another day before you got to today if there's an infinite number.
This volume of time started with the Big Bang. Now, just because time started with the Big Bang doesn't mean there was nothing before the Big Bang. Outside of our universe, what we call our universe, the big bubble that has come about as a result of the Big Bang, we don't know what's out there. It could be a whole lot of nothing. It could be a whole lot of timeless, spaceless nothing. And if that's the case, I really don't see a problem with, a universe springing up from nothing and then just having time itself. I don't see a problem with that. I don't see why that's a problem.
Number of days before today. But since today is here, there can only be a finite number of days before today. And if that's the case, then someone created time.
Maybe I'm just not as much of a hardcore intellectual as Frank Turek, but I fail to see how he has at all justified this line of argumentation that he is making. Also, the title of this video is Reacts to Challenges from the Comments. We are 8 minutes into a 22-minute video, and they have gone through exactly one comment, so speed it up, fellas. I would like to see more.
And that timeless being didn't have a beginning itself, which means that being's eternal.
I think I want to kind of do some justice to this question just because it boggles the mind, honestly, in any scenario. It boggles the mind entirely to think that there is actually, like you said, no thing, absolutely nothing, and that somehow, for no reason, we get all of the complexity, beauty, design, meaning, human intelligence, just everything.
There is no design. He said design. There is no design. Where he's going with this thought could actually be good, but I just want to clarify. There is no design. We see no design in nature that implies a designer.
That we see today coming from literally nothing. That, I think, on its face is entirely absurd. But then the second option would be some sort of eternal thing that isn't God that is somehow material or something. And I think this is where a lot of people are. I don't think people are saying nothing created everything for no reason. I think they're saying, where do you get this supernatural being? And isn't it more likely that there's just like an eternal atom? But to me, I look at that and I'm like, isn't that just like an eternal like rock? That just seems more absurd to me than like you said, someone who has the will to choose to create, or the creative apparatus to. But maybe unpack that a little bit, because I think that I want to be fair to say all three do kind of boggle the mind. An eternal God is a wild thing to think about. Existence itself, if you spend too long thinking about it, is boggling to the mind.
So he did make the point that I made earlier, that it's bizarre that anything exists at all. Whether you believe in God or don't know, regardless of your explanation of why there is things, why we are here, and what we perceive as the current moment, regardless of that, it is perplexing. And I think the problem here is that, like, any answer to the question is going to be unsatisfying to how our human minds are geared to work. Um, and I don't think there's any way around that. So it's just a thing we have to be uncomfortable with, and that's fine. We don't have to be comfortable with every answer to every question. It turns out some questions, all answers just kind of suck for.
But maybe zoom in on those two alternatives, and what would be your case for why God, in the sense that Christians mean it, is a better explanation for existence and the reality that we know than the alternatives to him?
Well, let's say the alternative is an eternal universe, as you pointed out. Well, we know the universe.
They are still on this one comment 10 minutes into this video. I just want to say, Daily Dose guy, if you happen to stumble across this video, do more comments next time. If I see comments in the title, I want more comments. I don't want just one or two. Give me a bunch of them. Respond to them quickly, get them over with. You don't have to spend a lot of time making your points. Make them shortly, succinctly, and get to some comments.
Is not eternal from science, number one, and we don't have time to get into all the details, but even Stephen Hawking, who was an atheist, said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang, okay?
And you'd sort of wonder, like, so if it's really that much of a problem for everything to come from nothing, why are there so many atheist scientists? Why are so many scientists unbothered by this idea? Very curious, isn't it?
So time itself had a beginning. If time had a beginning, what could have created time? Only something timeless, something outside.
The Big Bang. The Big Bang created time as we know it. What is time? You have to ask the question, what is time? Time essentially boils down to matter in motion. That is what time effectively is. And, you know, the more you think about time, the more you know about it, the weirder it gets, because time is relative. There is no universal time. Time is different wherever you are in the universe. That's why I think faster than light travel would be just an outright impossibility. Wormholes are, I suppose, possible technically, but it's hard to say what time you'd end up in if you went through them, because time is relative. And, like, I think these people just, like, don't understand what time is in the first place. I don't think they understand that time is relative. Granted, most people don't. It's a very mind-boggling thing that just, like, goes against our reason and logic. But, you know, the fact that it goes against our reason and logic and is that way is just, I think, proof that, like, the universe just doesn't give a shit whether we understand it or not.
Outside of time. And if you're outside of time, did you have a beginning? No, that you're eternal. That's the point. Okay.
So you mean a universe, a multiverse of nothing could just exist? Okay, then, glad we settled that one, Frank.
Secondly, prior to all this science being discovered, which really began with Einstein in, say, about the early 1900s.
Prior to all this science being discovered, he sounds so upset about it, like, all this dastardly science taking people away from the Lord. Jesus, man, chill out.
Hundreds, when he did his general relativity and special relativity equations and realized the universe had a beginning. Prior to that, atheists had no problem believing in an eternal universe. They said, oh yeah, the universe is eternal. As soon as they realized the universe wasn't eternal.
Well, it's not just atheists. I mean, it was scientists in general. You didn't have to be an atheist to think that specifically, but again, you know, shouldn't this be another point you can make here? Like, so if people thought the universe was eternal, he's saying that we could never be at this point. But obviously, people back then, when they considered the universe eternal, didn't consider that a whole lot of a problem. Isn't that curious, Mr. Turek? Because I find it very curious indeed.
And theists began saying, well, the eternal being is God, they suddenly had said, well, you can't have an eternal God. Wait a minute. Whoa, wait. You had no problem believing in an eternal universe, but now you're saying there's a problem believing in an eternal God? Why? Even Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, 10, 12 years ago, they did this tour, and they themselves admitted that one could make a pretty good case for a deistic God. In other words,
I don't think you could make a pretty good I think you'd make a case for it, but not a pretty good case. But certainly, you could definitely make a better case for a deistic God than a theistic God. I think if I came to the conclusion that there had to be a God, let's say for some reason or another, my thought process led me to the conclusion that there had to be a God of some kind. Um, I would not conclude it was a theistic God. I would conclude it is a deistic God. But I would also even then, I think if I made the conclusion that it was deistic God, I have to wonder, why? Why did that exist? And why did that create us and apparently just, go off somewhere else and just forget about us entirely? Why did that happen? And I do find it to be a very interesting thing that deism itself, it has a number of thoughts that go with it. One of the things that makes deism more reasonable than theism, in my opinion, is that the deist God doesn't interact with the universe he has created. So that just does kind of jive with my idea of the universe and how it works, which is to say that the universe works like you'd expect it to work if there is no God. In fact, it's only when adding God, a personal God, like a theistic God, into the mix that things start to get a little bit confusing. Because then you have all of these problems to solve, like theodicy, the problem of evil, divine hiddenness. If you have a deistic God, you don't really have to solve those problems because he just created the universe and just decided, well, I'm done here. Later, bitches. So you don't really have to, think that much into it with a deistic God. The deistic God is actually the only God conception that, aside from the pantheistic God, which is a very different concept entirely, the deistic God doesn't really mess with my idea of the universe, making it inherently more reasonable than a theistic God. I think to make the leap from a deistic God to a theistic God is much bigger than to make the leap from no God to deistic God. That may be a hot take. I don't know. Let me know in the comments.
Creator who just creates and then leaves his universe. But they said, well, I wouldn't personally accept that case, but you could make a case for it. Now, my question is, what's closer?
Well, I mean, technically you can make a case for anything. It doesn't mean it's a good case, doesn't mean it's a likely case, but you can make a case for anything you want to.
Deism and theism, or deism and atheism? Deism and theism are a lot closer than deism is to atheism. Deism meaning a God.
Well, I disagree in some respects. I mean, if you want to get technical, I guess the idea that there is a God of some kind is inherently closer to the idea of your God specifically. But if we're talking about how the universe works, then I think the deist God is more similar to atheism than it is to theism. But that's just my opinion.
God who just creates the world and then leaves it. Why are you open to a God who can create the universe, but not open to a God who creates the universe and intervenes in the universe?
Well, I think the reason I would theoretically be more open to that idea is that I see no intervention in the universe from any outside supernatural forces. I see natural forces at work, comprising the entirety of the universe and how it operates. There is no sign of divinity anywhere in the universe, which automatically, in my opinion, excludes the theist God. The deist God who just creates it and leaves, well, that's a lot less of a problem, because then the universe works the same way it does now.
I think I know the answer, and it might be in Lawrence Krauss's admission that he celebrates there's no God. Why would you celebrate there's no God? It seems to me there's a moral component here.
Well, you would celebrate that there's no God, specifically like the theist God, because he's kind of an asshole.
He doesn't want a God who brings morality with him. He's fine with a God who...
What do you mean morality? I mean, he sends Moses a set of laws. One of them is thou shalt not kill. Moses goes to the bottom of the mountain, sees people sacrificing to a golden calf, throws the tablets on the ground, and kills 3,000 people. And then, of course, after that, when they make it to the promised land, what happens? They genocide the Canaanites and take some of them as slaves and take their women. So these things are all very conditional. The morals in the Bible are very conditional to different circumstances. There is no universal morality told in the Bible in the first place, and a lot of the morals in the Bible are just terrible. For example, in the Bible, they stone gay people to death, adulterers too. But I mean, when you think about it, isn't that kind of immoral? I mean, when I think about it, I think it's terribly immoral. But I mean, even a Christian would have to acknowledge that stoning gay people to death just for being gay is not the move.
Just creates and then leaves us alone. But he doesn't want a God who's going to stick his nose into his business. That would be inconvenient. And so it seems to me.
Well, yes, if I'm just out here trying to live my life and trying to be the best person I can, and there's some divine dictator trying to tell me, no, you can't do it that way, I am going to see that as kind of a problem. So, yes, I do think it's worthy of celebrating the probable fact that there is no God. However, I must say this, and I've said this before. If you could show me enough evidence to believe that Jesus Christ was killed, I mean, I think he was, buried, and then rose from the dead on the third day and came back as the living incarnation of God on earth. If you could show me that, then I would have to say that that story is true, that, Jesus is the Son of God, the Savior of all mankind, so on and so forth. But, and this is kind of like a big but here, that would not make me convert to Christianity, because my morals, which I've found through my logic, reason, and empathy, do not jive with the morals of the Bible. However, I am intellectually honest enough to admit when I am wrong. So if I were convinced I was wrong about this whole God thing, you would be the first to know about it. So yes, I can celebrate the probable fact that there is no God, but also be cognizant of the fact that if there is one, and I find that out, I will admit it, and then say I don't care either way.
You're left with two possibilities. Either matter gave rise to mind, or mind gave rise to matter. That's it. At the end of the day, those are the two worldviews. And all.
I mean, I guess the mind could lead to matter in some regards, in the sense that by some mathematical calculations, a Boltzmann brain springing into existence from nothing is more likely than all of this we see around us, and therefore I could be a Boltzmann brain materializing you in my own little reality, which would honestly explain a whole lot about the incredible luck I have and how I'm so smart, charismatic, funny, brilliant.
All the evidence shows that mind gave rise to matter, that A, matter's not eternal. B, let me mention another argument. Matter's composed, and whatever's composed must have a composer. But you can't go on an infinite regress of composers. Eventually, you got to get back to an uncomposed composer.
Jesse, what the blankety blank are you talking about? Are you kidding me right now? What is this argument about composers? Like, are you saying that there's like an ultimate composer of like classical music, like that all music goes back to just like one composer? I mean, I'm pretty sure it probably could, I guess, but who are we to say like animals haven't been making music in some form or another the entire existence of animals? Like, I don't understand this argument. I guess probably there is like a beginning composer because this universe has cause and effect and there wasn't always life. But I don't think that's really that comparable to the universe itself, personally. I mean, I guess, like, it's a stretch, but I guess it works as an argument. But I don't like it. I don't think it's a great one. I think it's like it passes, I guess. It passes the smell test to a basic extent, but like, that is kind of a silly one. You have to admit, Mr. Turek.
And that uncomposed composer isn't made of matter. That uncomposed composer is an unembodied mind who just has the power to metaphorically speak and create. And that's exactly what the scriptures say. So you can't go on an infinite regress of composers. You can't go on an infinite regress of days. You can't go on.
You can't stop me.
An infinite regress of causes. You're ultimately going to get back to an uncaused first cause.
Well, if that were the case, there wouldn't be so many atheist and agnostic scientists, which you have admitted there are indeed many.
And even if there are multiple universes, that doesn't solve your problem.
Yes, it kind of does.
Still are going to get back to a beginner somewhere.
No, you're going to get back to a beginning somewhere at some point, probably. I mean, in terms of like the multiverse, if there really is a multiverse of just nothingness, then no, you're not going to have a creator for that, because you're going to have independent universes and time arising from big bangs all the time, all over the place. So far away, they'll probably never interact with each other because the space is going to be so large. The nothingness is going to be so large. I don't see why there has to be a beginning to that if that is what exists, but, go off, King.
This is great because this leads very nicely into what I also see all the time in the comment section.
You got my hopes up. I thought we were about to have another comment here. Are we about to go to another comment? Please go to another comment, fellas. Jesus.
Various versions of it, but essentially It's an accusation of God of the gaps. It's the idea of we can't understand that, therefore God. That's kind of the mockery that takes place.
That's not a mockery. That's a statement of truth. Every place that humans have tried to insert gods throughout human history has ultimately failed once we found out the explanations for those things. At one point, we didn't understand how thunderstorms formed, so we invented a thunder god. At one point, we didn't understand how earthquakes worked, so we had earthquake gods. We had gods for every single thing in nature until we learned how those things worked. So God, in the words of somebody else, maybe deGrasse Tyson, I forget who, God is being shoved into an ever smaller box. And currently, if you accept the scientific explanations for life, the universe, so on and so forth, God's box is what happened before the Big Bang. That is a very small box. That is a perilously small box. And I would say that if we have disproved all the other boxes God could be in, then he's not likely to be in this box either. Now, you can't say for sure yet. We may never be able to say for sure, but that seems pretty likely to me.
How is what you're saying different than that? Because I think this is a key point of miscommunication between theist and atheist.
I have to say, I don't have the highest opinion of Daily Dose of Wisdom. A lot of the time, he'll comment on videos of debates between atheists and Christians or agnostics and Christians, and he'll say he's clarifying the points. But in fact, he's just making them harder to understand, and he's often misunderstanding them. But I have to give credit where credit is due. The bar is very low here, but he has leapt over it because in this video, for some reason, somehow, he does seem to be understanding a lot of the things he's talking about. So my hat is off to you, Daily Dose. This one time, don't expect this to ever happen again, much as I don't expect this to ever happen again.
What you just described there, to me, doesn't sound like there's some complexity that we don't understand. And because we can't understand it, let's just put God into the gap. It sounds like you're saying you're actually making more of an inference-based case for an intelligent beginning point as opposed to a materialistic beginning point. And I want to zoom in on that because I think that that's another huge area of disconnect. As I read these debate threads in the comment section, I just see people utterly missing each other along that point.
So I think they're about to make some very meaningless distinctions here. Let's see if I'm right.
Yeah, maybe the fastest way of getting there is to say if all of nature had a beginning, whatever created nature can't be made of nature. In other words, it must be something beyond nature, something we would call supernature. In fact, I was at the University of Michigan many years ago, and a former so-called Christian got up to the microphone, and after I had given the cosmological argument that everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause, and the best explanation is a God, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator. He said, oh, that's a God of the gaps argument.
It is. It is the God of the Gaps argument. You are just going in circles here. Like, this is the same argument over and over, and it's been wrong every single time. There's no reason to think it'll be right this time, my dude, my guy, my friend, my pal, my buddy.
And I said, no, John, it's not a God of the gaps argument. We're not arguing from what we don't know. We're arguing from what we do know. We do know that if space, matter, and time had a beginning.
No, we don't know these things. We know that certain scientists have very strong opinions on how reality works, that how the Big Bang happened, what came before, if there was a before, all that sort of thing. We have a number of different explanations. We don't have the explanation, though. And I think until we have the explanation, it's really hard to actually say much about what's there. It's a big question mark currently. Like, we have potential explanations, but that's all we have. We have question marks. And you can't just take the question mark and put God in there, or you are, yes, you're doing a God of the gaps on us, buddy.
Then whatever created it can't be made of space, matter, and time. Must transcend space, matter, and time. And he said, well, if you just give science more time, we're going to figure out a natural cause for all of nature. I said, John, first of all, that sounds a lot like faith.
Okay, so I think we're going to call it here because this video is getting pretty long and they're just saying the same things over and over again. I can appreciate to some extent Daily Dose in this video, not doing a terrible job. It's really honestly surprising. But of course, Frank Turek is once more being Frank Turek and being completely unreasonable and just saying the same things over and over, equivocating, all of this good stuff. So, what did we learn from this video? Well, not much. I mean, some of you probably learned I can sing a little bit, so that's kind of cool. I'm glad I got to do that, and thank you for watching. Have a good one.